This is gonna be fun.
What's going on, guys? This is the Entertainment Critic here. Welcome to my review for the finale of Doctor Who Series 11. I know it's gotten so quickly, so I might get the episode name wrong here. It's really hard to pronounce. I've been trying to pronounce it for days, but here we go. It's episode 10, which was entitled The Battle of Ranskoor of Kolos. I believe that's how you pronounce it. That's probably completely wrong, but I blame Chris Triple there for creating an episode title which nobody can pronounce. Like, when you create an episode title, you want somebody to be able to remember it, so like they can, when they're talking to someone, say, oh yeah, you remember that episode, and then you don't have that with this episode, because you're like, did you remember the Battle of Ranskoor? Yes, you see, you can't pronounce it fluently constantly, which could detract from the episode's word of mouth figure, because nobody can pronounce the name. Anyway, that's jokes aside. Getting into episode review itself, so you know the structure. I'm going to talk about the story, what I liked, what I didn't like. So the story of the episode was that on this planet, I believe it's called Ranskoor of Kolos. It was, and these people, or this race of people called Uks, have powers for that they're able to shape reality. And what they were doing is they shaped some kind of building from the looks of it, or they were trying to shape some kind of building because of it's their belief. And Tim Shaw, we actually find out, appears behind them after his battle with the Doctor and the woman who fell to Earth, and he's obviously been damaged from the mind that the Doctor placed on him when he teleported away. And what he does is he actually builds a religion around the monks. Oh, no, I'm going to call them monks, and they're not exactly monks, but around the Uks. So basically, they end up worshipping him as a false god. And the Doctor ends up getting 9 different distress calls, all from this one planet called Ranskoor of Kolos. And obviously she decides to respond to those with distress calls. And when they arrive on the planet, they come across this guy who can't actually remember his own name. We don't know at first how long he's been stranded on the planet, but he explains that once you leave onto the planet starts messing with your mind, and he had forgotten who he was. So what the Doctor had done, especially before she left the TARDIS with Team TARDIS, she gave them these neurobalancers, so it stops the planet from messing with their head. And she ends up giving it to this guy, and meanwhile she's doing that, Graham and Ryan actually go over and start investigating what's happened to the ship. And they actually find out the ship's completely fine. He could have left at any point, but he just chose not to for whatever reason. And we find out his name is actually Paltreki, and he'd been sent there because there had been a battle on the planet, and he was sent there to recover artifacts. And we actually found out the artifacts he was sent to recover, and we see one of them is planets. So they're like these little dense crystalline type things, and there's Paltreki has one of them, and then he was sent to retrieve all of them, but he obviously got ambushed before he could get all of them, and all of his crew were captured except for him. He got away with this crystal type thing. And while they're there, while the Doctor is on the ship, Paltreki actually gets I don't know what you call it, a hologram message type thing from the leader of the Uks, Andino, I believe her name was, and she tells Paltreki that he needs to bring back the planet, otherwise his crew is going to die. And we actually see one of the crew members die, and the Doctor comes up with a genius plan. They're going to actually just stroll on into the building where the Uks were basing themselves, I guess. And once she'd done that, once they got onto the ship, because obviously she'd gone through all of the ship's armory, and one thing I didn't quite agree with, and I'm not quite sure, she kind of contradicts herself in this episode, and I'll get onto that in my negatives as well. She attaches grenades to what we find out is the planet as like an insurance policy. So like, if you kill me, I will blow up what this thing is so precious to you, not realizing that it was actually a planet, and she became committing mass genocide if she did that. But yeah, and it's something she says that just puts me off a little. It's saying anything, and if it's a wall or if anything blocking your way, it's fair game. And she was anti-weapons all the time, and they find out Ryan questions her on this as well. He says that why didn't, in the Ghost Monitor episode, why did you stop me from taking on those robots? Because they weren't people, they were just robots. And she said, well, you were new and I had to set down the ground rules for you. So, but you don't follow your own rules half the time, and you expect these people who are traveling with you to follow these rules. It was just, it kind of takes her out of the episode. It doesn't take her out of the episode as much as some of her other contradictions in this series was, and I honestly don't understand why there were so many contradictions in this series, because this series was the first series of Doctor Who to have an actual writer's room. So there's a whole room of people coming up with the plots for the series, so you'd think that they'd interweave them and there wouldn't be like inconsistencies in the story. So like, an example of inconsistency is I believe it was Arachnids in the UK, the Doctor says, I hate conspiracies, and then in Kablam she's like, I love a conspiracy. She didn't change her mind on conspiracies that quickly. I really don't think so. So there's some inconsistencies, and that was just another example of it. And the inconsistency here is once she gets up onto the ship, obviously each of them have their own plans. So Ryan and Graham were going to rescue Paltraki's crew, and they had their own the life signals of these people on this little screen. Paltraki and Yasmin were going off to find these the other crystal type things that Paltraki had, because he said there are others of them on the ship, so they've gone off to find that. And the Doctor's gone to confront Tim Shaw, or Timsha. I'm gonna try and call him by his real name, but I might slip into Tim Shaw eventually. Anyway, the Doctor ends up coming across Andinio, and she tells her she doesn't want to cooperate at first, and Tim Shaw actually tells the Doctor Andinio to bring the Doctor to him, and we actually see that he's in some kind of stasis type thing. It's not exactly stasis, but he has a bunch of tubes coming out of him, and it wasn't exactly clear if he had to be in there because of the damage he sustained in the premiere episode, the one when he fell to Earth, or if he was just in there because he was the leader and that was just what he was supposed to look like. That was one of the things that wasn't clear, and he orders Andinio to leave the room, and the Doctor and him have this little conversation about what happened to Tim Shaw after, and he explains his whole backstory of how he arrived on Ranskoor and Kolos, and he shaped his the will of his race onto the Ux, and he ended up, what his ultimate plan was to get revenge, and it was all a trap it was kind of all of a trap for the Doctor. Basically, what his plan was is he was going to use Stenza technology along with the power of the Ux to completely destroy the Earth and put it into one of those crystal type things, and then probably blow it up, knowing him. And this is where we got into the other inconsistency with the Doctor's dialogue, because she's like, I bet you, knowing you, it was an explosive. Even though she's not in the position to judge somebody on using explosives when she's just referenced the fact that she's got grenades attached to the back on her back to the crystal planet thing. And this is where she does eventually find out that each of the crystals are planets, and they just don't have the density of the planet, they're designed like that. And meanwhile, Ryan and Graham find the people in the tubes, and they find out there's more people than they expected in the tubes. And they start slowly getting out the people using this kind of hacking device type thing, the Master Codebreaker. And obviously Tim Shaw actually sends his robot army after them, and we find out that in the Ghost Monument, the robots that were defending Desolation, I believe it was, were actually the same robots that were in Tim Shaw's army. So obviously there's a link there. Tim Shaw obviously somehow, or some kind of stanza, because there was reference to the stanza in the Ghost Monument, ended up on Desolation, and that's how the whole the things in the sky. I can't remember what they were called. The possessed pieces of cloth type things were talking to the Doctor. That's where they came from, because they were stanza technology technically, and they end up killing all of the robots. Well, Paltraki kills some of the robots when he finds them, and we actually then, once soon as they've got all of the people out, they start evacuating, and this is where the Doctor finds out that it was all a trap, and they launch. Tim Shaw had ordered Andinio to actually launch the plan to destroy the Earth, and the Doctor ends up coming up with the plan of harnessing the power of the TARDIS, along with using the Uck's power. And what she did to get the Ucks out of their little mind thing, because they'd already been locked in, what they couldn't do is they couldn't remove the Ucks from what they were doing, otherwise it would have killed them. So what she did is she conveniently took off her neural stabilizer and puts it on the Ucks, even though it does make sense. It makes sense in the story because they needed it for the planet. But she takes off the neural stabilizer, she modifies it a bit with the sonic and puts it on the Ucks, and it takes them out of their little thing and it saves the Earth. But then they have the whole problem of the planets are actually breaking up the shells that they were put in, so they have to put all the planets in the right place in space and time. So what they do is they harness the power of the TARDIS and the power of the Ucks, and they transmit all of the planets back to their original point in space and time. And the Doctor actually calls back to a previous episode of Journey's End. She said, "I once towed your planet across the universe with the TARDIS," and I liked the good subtle callbacks in the series. Like there was one with Unicorn and the Wasp. There was obviously the Fez. There's a couple of others I might be missing as well, but those are the main ones. And they end up taking all the planets back in the right place in time and space. Originally, when I first watched the episode, I thought that one of the Ucks had actually died because he just falls on the floor. Delph just falls on the floor, and I thought he was dead at first, but obviously he was fine. And the Doctor ends up having this little speech. Once they were done, the Doctor ends up having this little speech with Delph and Andinio saying that you need to keep your faith and the universe will surprise you. Also, backtracking a little bit, Graham and Ryan have this little scene where Graham had been debating with himself the entire episode if he was going to kill Tim Shaw for what he did to Gracie. And I really like this. It shows that there was a character arc throughout the series, and it was that Graham decided to be the better person, and he didn't kill Tim Shaw. What he did instead is him and Ryan ended up putting Tim Shaw into a stasis chamber, which he will never escape from, so we say. And they leave him there, and Graham ends up leaving the better person. And that is the episode plot as a whole. Now, getting into the things that I liked and that I didn't like I said, I liked the whole plot with Graham and how it concluded his plot off nicely. It wrapped up the plot with Tim Shaw nicely. He could come back at any point after this, but the whole arc of the stanza throughout Series 11 was wrapped up. The Doctor Journey had a kind of... it wasn't her best performance in this episode. Her best performance is probably in the Witchfinders, but this was another strong performance from her. Graham and Ryan, again, they've been amazing throughout the entire season. I've loved watching their arc and how they've grown as characters throughout this series. Jasmine, she's still kind of just there for me. She doesn't really do much. She's just there to ask questions, and I guess this is another callback to what the classic era Doctor Who used to be like, because the companions in Doctor Who, the female companions in classic Doctor Who, were always the people who ran away from the monsters and always asked the Doctor questions so the audience could understand what was happening in that situation. And that is kind of what Yasmin represents right now, and I can see her character being more, but they just don't want to do more of it, so we're just kind of stuck with this. So yeah, that was one of the things I liked, and obviously I liked the whole thing with the Ux and how Tim Shaw made himself a false god. That was really cool, and I liked Tim Shaw's design in this. Patraki was a good character. What else? The Ux were a cool concept. Again, the cinematography, the visuals in this episode were stunning, and that's something that's been consistent throughout all of the series, except for maybe the spiders and maybe the Pating. Everything else has looked at like film level quality of for some of the CGI. But yeah, getting into the things I didn't like so much, obviously the inconsistencies with the Doctor. The script was a little weak in places. Again, it's a Chris Chibnall script, and I didn't really expect much from it. His scripts have probably been the weakest of this series, but it was still a good episode as a whole. Some of the other things I had back, let's see. I guess it was a complete convenience that the neurostabilizers even worked on the Ux, because they were programmed to work for the specific people they were given to, I believe, and then they ended up working for the Ux. I could be wrong with that, and I'll probably be corrected if I'm wrong. What else was there that I didn't really like? That's really it. I don't know how I feel, because it's not the strongest episode by a long way, but it's definitely not the weakest episode. It kind of just sits in the middle, slightly above middle maybe, and that's kind of sort of disappointing. For a series finale, it's supposed to be the best episode of the series, maybe minus behind the premiere, and it's just not. And that kind of bothers me, but it was still a strong episode, and it concluded plot threads that were left hanging throughout the series. So overall, I probably give it a 7 out of 10 probably, and I still think it's a pretty good episode. And now, alright, so if you guys enjoyed this video, please do hit that like button. Your support is very much appreciated, and subscribe if you're new. And let me know what you thought of this episode in the comment section below. Let's have a discussion about it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.